Hello again, everyone. Tom Nagorski, Managing Editor at the Cipher Brief, at the Cipher Brief Virtual Studio. As we continue to examine the aftershocks of the sudden and startling U.S. shift away from some of its traditional allies and its shift away from Ukraine, we turn today to what all this may mean for Taiwan. Ever since Russia's war against Ukraine began, the full-scale war 3 years ago, experts have studied the possible ramifications for Taiwan and questions about whether the United States would support Taipei and Taiwan in similar fashion in the event that China used force against the island. And that question now, given that all that's happened in the last few days and weeks, has added urgency. A few Americans understand the strategic questions surrounding China and Taiwan better than our guest today, Admiral Mike Studeman, former commander of the Office of Naval Intelligence. Mike, great of you to be back with us again. We had planned this conversation before the blow up, the debacle, whatever you want to call it, at the White House the other day between Presidents Trump and Zelensky. I wonder if you can share any thoughts before we get into other things about how that may have been received or how it has been received in Taipei.
Yeah, I think there's a generic concern about the unpredictability of U.S. foreign policy. To this day, it's not clear exactly how President Trump will treat Taiwan and others in the Indo-Pacific, even as they talk about focusing more of their efforts there, maybe stabilizing Europe, having that be a place where Europe takes care of itself, and then freeing up the United States to take care of some other issues that are, in the Far East. There is a sense that if President Trump was willing to go over President Zelensky's head to go direct to Putin, then why wouldn't he do the same potentially with Xi Jinping and cut out President Lai in some sort of future deal? But all in all, despite those generic fears, which I think reflects the uncertainty of how to interpret where Washington is going, where POTUS is actual, that the Taiwan thinkers and officials believe that actually this is mainly a good turn for Taiwan, taking a look at the aggregate situation at hand, because they agree that, in fact, the U.S. may need to do more in the Indo-Pacific, that's where a lot of its focus and emphasis needs to be, and that the alliance system to them is something that looks like it will be supported in Asia. When the Taiwans take a close look at the micro evidence that Taiwan's going to be okay, they looked at the Prime Minister Ishiba and Trump joint statement where Taiwan was listed as a security concern, which requires both of the nations to work together. So that was a good thing in Taiwan's eyes. They also looked at the Taiwan fact sheet that the State Department sent out, where they had taken out the line, "We do not support Taiwan independence," and other kinds of things that the president of Taiwan is putting into play now that address what appear to be the core concerns that President Trump has with Taiwan and the deficit. The deficit with Taiwan is something on the order of $74 billion. At the same time, Taiwan has been investing in the U.S. like gangbusters. Like 40% of their overseas outbound investment goes to the United States. That's for 2023 and 2024. And the U.S. is the biggest destination for Taiwan investment. And they've already invested in Arizona. They've had some chip making occur there. And President Lai intends to, work perhaps some additional investments and deals, maybe investing a little bit in the U.S. company Intel to give it more legs and to help President Trump reindustrialize. And they're talking about LNG, buying maybe more agricultural products and things like that. At the same time, President Lai is reassured that he's going to submit a budget proposal to try to get Taiwan's percentage of GDP spent on defense from 2.6 to 3%, and is appearing to sort of address some of the main concerns that this new administration has So I think Taiwan believes that they're reading the issues accurately. They're okay. They have some general concerns based on unpredictability, but by and large, I think they feel like they're in a pretty good position right now.
Recognizing excellence in national security, the Cipher Brief Honors Dinner celebrates those who've made a real difference in protecting our nation. It's an unforgettable evening with top leaders in the field. Join us in honoring these remarkable contributions. Reserve your seat now at cipherbriefhonors.com.
It's not for me to push back on what the Taiwanese think, but just so I understand it better, because, and again, it's so, as you said, so unpredictable, Mike. But if you're sitting in Taiwan, I would imagine you also think of parallels such as small democratic entity, large, powerful, authoritarian adversary that we assumed was an adversary of the United States as well as with Russia. And given President Trump's transactional approach to so much of this, why would you not have a concern there that in the same way as you said at the outset, that for a transactional approach reason, the president now appears to just, maybe not throwing Ukraine under the bus, but just that putting aside a whole big American precedent, if he wants to make a deal with Xi Jinping on any number of fronts, and there have been rumblings of that, why might he not do the same with Taiwan?
I think they see that the European issue is idiosyncratic to Europe, that in fact, that transactionally working deals there with Russia that are designed in their core, whether or not they're well thought through or not, I don't think that they are, that you can peel off Russia from China. We can talk more about that. But they think that anything that actually tries to wedge between Russia and China is a good thing for Taiwan. And that even as we might put pressure on Europe, even to the point of shattering the alliance, the Taiwans believe that it's all designed to be able to lift and shift over into the Indo-Pacific, which then benefits them. So they see sort of how that the whole sort of global policy making is trying to re-engineer the focus on dealing with China, its main concern. So, like I said, I think that the instability and the likelihood that maybe something could crack left or right on them without notice, that's a general fear that could occur too. But so much evidence exists for them. And in fact, they may be a net beneficiary in all of this. If we pressurize China more, if we are buying more military hardware, maybe having it for deploy, working with the Taiwan defense establishment to be able to make them more resistant to, Chinese coercion and aggression. If we're strengthening what we do with Japan, the Philippines, Australia, India, and all the like, they see that that's actually a net good thing for them. And I don't think they think that right now there's a deal that's going to sacrifice Taiwan in the making. They understand that Mike Waltz, as a national security advisor, is very astute about these things, has a lot of good experience on the matter. Ivan Kanapathy, who's also the senior director for the Indo-Pacific, also having spent time in Taiwan and AIT, the American Institute in Taipei, that they have allies that exist within the close advisor set with the president.
Right. Now, before President Trump's election last year, we were all looking at tea leaves, so to speak, in terms of what was said during the campaign. I think we may have spoken at some point then. And there were conflicting signals in a way. Now Vice President J.D. Vance said on more than one occasion that part of his argument against robust U.S. support for Ukraine was that America's attention should be to the Far East and to China. I think he wasn't the only one who said that. On the other hand, Mr. Trump himself made a series of comments that Taiwan wasn't doing enough to build up its own defenses. Again, sounded kind of like a Europe-Ukraine point. But those things are not incompatible, right? I mean, what is your read in terms of just a general approach that the president himself may have vis-a-vis Taiwan?
Yeah. I think the standard practice is bargain high and throw threats that scare to the core and cause people to rethink about what could be if they don't cooperate to a certain level. And I think that opening move, which may come off as very raw and coarse there and upsetting, has a device associated with it, which is to set conditions for maybe rethinking the status quo. And so I think it does cause damage. I think it caused damage in serious ways. But at the same time, it in the unmooring that it occurs, it allows for some things to be renegotiated. And I think that ploy was used with Taiwan as it has been with others. The Taiwans are responding. They're saying, okay, we got it. We're going to increase defense spending. We're going to do an emergency supplemental here. We know we have issues with the legislative UN because they froze or cut some amount of the defense budget, but there are contingencies that allow them to go back and allow that to be unfrozen and potentially uncut. And so we need to recognize that the domestic politics in each of these countries really matters. You can't just sort of drive them to 5 or 10% of GDP. We can't even get there that fast. And so I think so long as some of the demands don't become so arbitrary that they break some of these countries, but do reset where they are, that you can get to a new modus vivendi. But Taiwan is clearly playing. They are cooperating. They're doing the investments. They understand how to meet some of the goals of this new administration. That includes working on the trade deficit and doing more investments in the United States, plus many other things that they've asked for.
Right. It's interesting. And you have to tell me when I'm making too many, since you said it's idiosyncratic, I shouldn't keep making these Europe analogies, but all the stuff you just said about defense spending, right? It is, and that they're getting the message, and now they're going to do more. You could have substituted Europe for Taiwan in what you just said, right? And it sounds similar.
Yeah, I think that the issue is that, you can't just, if you're dealing with the China problem, if we go into macro geostrategic, it's a global problem. It's not a Taiwan straight fight. It's not defend Taiwan against, an invasion. And if you do that, you're good. Or even just having China cooperate on trying to strangle fentanyl exports to Mexico and the United States. If you only narrowly scope yourself to that, then you will never deal with the China problem the way it's showing up in every sector. And it's about global influence at the end of the day. Look, the Chinese want to displace the U.S. as the leader of the world system. Right now, they take a look at what Washington's doing, and they see opportunity. They'll talk about it this week at the National People's Congress, and they have a Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference along with that. So for the next 2 weeks, they're going to be thinking about what they're seeing, but they can't see the changes with anything more than delight at this stage. They've already prepared counter sanctions to be able to go tit for tat and exact more pain on the U.S. than the U.S. can exact on them. They're willing to keep the rhetoric a little bit down so they can still have some negotiating room with the new Trump team. At the same time, they love the fact that the Americans themselves are going to dismantle major elements of the international order and the alliance system. That's been their objective throughout. They say alliances are block thinking, they interfere with their direction to try to have a common destiny for humankind. And a more stable Beijing becomes a more attractive government to deal with than a very volatile regime in Washington that appears to rake people over the coals. And so they see opportunity in this. And the fact that we cut off our soft power with cutting U.S. aid, I mean, that's a known goal of epic proportions. And the Chinese, already globally deployed with their capabilities, can step in even more into those vacuums to earn the hearts and minds of a majority of the globe in a way that I think we're underestimating. If we want to actually deal with China, it's a global playing field, not just one in Asia.
So let me take you then to the last question I had, which is there has been some rumbling. I don't know that anybody in the administration has said this publicly, that the pivot to Russia, if that's what it is, it sure looks like one, is in part a kind of counterweight to China, or it's a way to cleave the Russia-China partnership. What do you think of that as is that a strategic explanation, do you think, for anything that's going on?
I don't think it's well thought through. I think they need an azimuth and a velocity check right now. The fact of the matter is, if you take a look at the reverse Kissinger effect, people talk about this. The Chinese were in a state of hostilities with the Soviet Union, which allowed for an opening. It was the predicate to be able to actually get China to come and work with the United States. It's because they had border wars, they had ideological differences globally between Mao and Stalin and others. Those conditions do not exist. China was there to provide a lifeline to Russia to enable its ability to carry out the campaign in Ukraine and withstand global pressure. They owe their existence and to some extent, some preserve a legitimacy because the Chinese were supporting them. And so the idea that you're going to wedge between them here is very far-fetched. The issue is that both of those countries have a historic aim. The aim is to see the reduction of U.S. power and to be able to reconstruct the international system in a way, revise it in critical ways that allow room for authoritarian governments to, have their own spheres of influence and then some with regard to the international order. And so I don't see that Putin is going to change this long-standing aim where the distrust of the United States is so high. I think they'll play this administration and they'll look cooperative. You're already seeing that with mineral cooperation, things like this. But you can't, if you're on the Xi Jinping side or you're on the Putin side of it, looking back at the United States, you can't ever trust one administration to actually set policy for more than 4 years. They know this. They've seen the whiplashing going back and forth, and they know there's a strong cadre of people who are the traditional internationalists who rightly suspect what Russia is doing in the world and have look askance at any acts of aggression and coercion in Europe and say, this needs to be stopped, because if you cooperate with it, it will continue. And if it's coming at the sacrifice of the NATO alliance, then that makes most sense. If your gambit is unlikely to fail or unlikely to succeed, and you're actually forfeiting your strongest cards with the U.S. alliance system, and in particular NATO, you're automatically starting to become more isolated and unable to protect yourself in a way that you're going to need to. So I think this gambit was not thought through, and they need to listen to people who actually are more expert on these issues.
All right. Well, speaking of people who are expert on these issues, we appreciate, again, Admiral Mike Studeman, you're being with us today. Super helpful. Thanks for being with us at the site.
Thanks, Tom. Great conversation and really important issues.